A naturally gifted military and political leader, Napoleon Bonaparte harnessed his skills to conquer an entire continent. He was born on August 15th, 1769, in Agincourt, France. He grew up in a poor noble family and received a scholarship to the military college of Brienne in France at the age of 8. Although it is popularly known that he was short, this was only during his time as a child in school. He would later grow up to be a height of 5'7", which was actually the average for a man during the 18th century. After he graduated from this military college, he entered the army as a second lieutenant in 1785. He rose through the ranks during the tumultuous time of the French Revolution. Later in 1793, he was a brigadier general in the Committee of Public Safety. After being successful in this, he went into Egypt with an army to disrupt Britain's access to India in 1798. He would later return to France in 1799, as his army and navy were defeated by the British and the Egyptians. It was during this return the perfect storm arose. As he returned in 1799, the French Revolution had left a vacuum for power. It was during this that he overthrew the Directorate and was then elected as the first consul in 1799. This was the first step towards democracy in France. It was during this time that he mended the connection with the Catholic Church to back his campaign. This democracy was short-lived, though, as he was declared consul for life in 1802. He would not stop here, though, and coronated himself as emperor in 1804. It was during this time that he revived and embraced the principle of virtu, which is the sacrifice of personal interest for the good of the republic, the whole. He would use this alongside with the Code Napoleon as the law of the land to push his agendas and his ideas. There were many social changes that were marked during his political campaigns. He showed the abolishment of serfdom. He passed much legislation for religious toleration. He created schools for scientific and technological study. He also unified the Germanic states in the Confederation of the Rhine, excluding Austria. He imposed the Napoleonic Code and was actually responsible for spreading the metric system all across Europe. We can see that after he became Emperor of France, he began his conquering and colonization. He drafted a young army of men and earned their devotion by fighting alongside them in at least 60 battles. He would push on to end the Holy Roman Empire in 1806. Following in that year, he defeated Prussia. In 1807, he defeated Russia, and then took his army of 100,000 men and pushed into Spain and Portugal. These armies forced those royals out of their capitals in 1807. While he occupied Spain and Portugal, there was a large army of independence fighters that he had to keep down and quell their resistance. While he was doing this, he moved his focus to his invasion of Russia. In 1812, Napoleon moved his army of 600,000 men into Russia. He was met, though, with a very unique defense strategy by the Russians. They employed the scorched earth approach. This was a strategy that the Russians would use by burning their cities to the ground. They would not give any resistance to Napoleon, but they would take away any supplies that they could use to push further into Russia. So Napoleon's army, low on supplies, continued to push their way through the Russian mainland. As winter was approaching, they eventually reached Moscow and defeated Russia, but their victory was marked with defeat as Moscow burnt to the ground. He would then take the remnants of his army and retreat to France. His 600,000 man army had been dwindled down to 20 to 30,000 men after only a 6-month campaign. We can see that upon his return, the coalition armies of England, Spain, and Portugal were ready to take advantage of this dwindled army. It was after the Battle of Leipzig in 1813 that Napoleon was defeated, and he was left with only France. He had lost his empire and all of the land that he had conquered. Shortly after this, he was deposed as emperor on April 2nd, 1814, and because of this, he was exiled to the island of Elba. This did not stop him, though. He would then escape from the island of Elba in 1815, and with confidence, he marched towards his enemies, gathering an army of about 100,000 men along the way. He met the coalition army at Waterloo and was defeated there on June 18, 1815. This was Napoleon's final defeat, and he was exiled to St. Helena, where he would later die in 1821. We were tasked with viewing a world leader through the lens of the leadership theories that we have studied in this class. Leadership can be defined as a process whereby an individual influences a group of individuals to achieve a common goal. The first theory that we will connect Napoleon's life to is the trait approach. This approach is easily described as a leader who exhibits intelligence, self-confidence, determination, integrity, sociability, and emotional intelligence. Napoleon was a man of great intelligence. He used this intellect to drive his military campaigns. Napoleon's strategy was one of a military genius. He also definitely did not lack in the department of self-confidence. No one was quite as confident in Napoleon as Napoleon himself was. He had no fear when he launched out into Europe and into Russia. This is also the main reason that he escaped an island and marched his way as he gathered troops to face a large army. He was also a man of great determination. We can see that his military campaigns were marked by this. There was never a challenge that he was not ready to face. He made it his goal to be the Emperor of France and to take over the continent of Europe. And it was by his determination that he was brought to the brink of almost achieving this success. Napoleon's integrity can be questionable, though. He manipulated the media and used self-propaganda to promote himself to the people. By doing this, he created a godlike ethos that his people believed in. His methods of receiving followership was questionable, but he was a man of integrity when it came to his cause. He knew what he believed in. He was going to be strong upon that. Napoleon's leadership was also marked by sociability. We can see that Napoleon used the battlefield to build his relationships. He fought alongside his soldiers in more than 60 battles, and he would also use his oratory skills to build relationships with the Catholic Church and his people. He was also a man that understood emotions. He used this emotional intellect to understand that his people had to emotionally back his cause if they were going to follow him to the death. He did this by creating a strong pride in nationality. The people of France created a strong connection to their country, which was led by Napoleon. He used this allegiance to keep the morale up for his soldiers in time of great struggle. We can see that this allegiance remained even after he was exiled to the islands. In conclusion, for the trait approach, Napoleon was a prime example of what a leader is. While his methods could be somewhat questionable in regard to integrity, he used intelligence, self-confidence, determination, integrity, sociability, and emotional intelligence to lead his people. He led by rallying his people underneath a greater cause to further France, while painting himself as the embodiment of victory. The second theory that we will be looking at is the skills approach. Napoleon was known for his adapting skills. We can see that he adapted himself based upon his leadership level at the time. He balanced his conceptual, human, and technical skills based upon the period of his life. We can see the focus of technical skills-based leadership when he started his career as a second lieutenant and led his men with excellent technical skill. It was here that he gained loyalty and began to prove that he was a capable leader. He would then shift to a human skills-based leadership as he was promoted to brigadier general and led an army of his own. He would return to France, and it was marked by political success. He used his human skills to create legislation that would gather the people underneath his leadership. He would then unify the French people after being elected their consul. He would also use conceptual skills after he was coronated as emperor. He used these skills to draw a plan to take over the entire continent of Europe. He would use these skills to lead an army that was almost successful in taking over all the world powers of the time. His conceptual skills can be seen by his understanding of the art of war. In conclusion, for the skills approach, Napoleon was an effective leader who perfectly adapted himself to varying levels of leadership, propelling him to being the emperor of an entire continent. The next theory that we will be looking at is the path-goal theory. Napoleon Bonaparte is quoted as, "Take time to deliberate, but when the time for action comes, stop thinking and go in." Path-goal theory can be characterized by 4 different leadership styles: directive, supportive, participative, and achievement-oriented. Napoleon was known for leading to the strengths of his people. He was a directive leader that gave his followers a clear instruction about the task ahead. He would set the expectations high at a level of excellence that he required. He was rigid with his timeline for success and kept his citizens in order. He was also very participative. This was a characteristic that set him apart from other leaders of the time. He was willing to participate in battle with his troops and get in the fray. He used this participative style to gain total allegiance from his troops. He was also a very supportive leader during his early years. He used this to gain his influence by passing legislation that supported the people of France. He would later make himself less relatable as he took on the godlike ethos, but to make up for this, he encouraged the principle of virtu, which changed the focus from himself being supportive, and rather all decisions were made for the common good of France. He was also achievement-oriented, as he set the expectation of his endeavors to total control of Europe. He continually led his people to overcome or avoid obstacles to reach this goal. In conclusion, the path-goal theory requires a leader that will define his goals, clarify the path, remove obstacles, and provide support. It suggests that a leader must choose a leadership style that will best suit his followers and goals. Napoleon did this at all levels of leadership throughout his life. He was masterful in his overcoming and avoiding of obstacles. I guess except that one time in Russia where his troops all froze to death. The next theory we will be looking at is authentic leadership. It can be defined as a complex process that emphasizes the development of qualities that help leaders to be perceived as trustworthy. Napoleon Bonaparte said, "It is the unconquerable soul of man, and not the nature of the weapon he uses, that ensures victory." This can be seen through 2 different approaches. The first is practical. Napoleon was a man that was not characterized by compassion. He had an excellency standard set, and he was going to reach this by any means necessary. This was often seen with his lack of compassion towards his troops as he pushed further into Russia and his different military campaigns in Europe. He made up for this, though, in his connectedness. He had great relationships with his troops as he stood alongside them in their battles and got involved in their day-to-day struggles. He was a man of values. This was seen in his behavior. He was always a man that stood strong and led his troops through his values. He was also a man of consistency. Napoleon had very high self-discipline and was going to do whatever it took to reach his goals. He was also a man of passion. His purpose was clear, and he was going to lead his followers with this purpose. Authentic leadership can also be seen through the theoretical approach. This looks at a leader who is self-aware, has balanced processing, an internalized moral perspective, and relational transparency. Napoleon was a man who was very self-aware of who he was and what he needed to do. He also had the ability to analyze his information objectively and make the best decisions to best ensure his victory. He was also a man that made decisions upon his own morals. He did not let the influence or morals of others affect his decisions or influence what he was going to do. He did lack in relational transparency, though. He was not open and honest with the struggles and troubles of his life, because this can affect the morale of his troops. We can see that in conclusion for this authentic leadership, that Napoleon embodied 8 of these 9 traits of authentic leadership. He was compassionate, he was connected, he was consistent, he behaved within his values, he was passionate, self-aware, balanced in behavior, and had an internal moral perspective. He did not keep a transparency about his relational leadership, but military leaders must not always open their struggles of a campaign to their soldiers. This openness can lead to a drop of morale in the face of great opposition, which can lead to ensured defeat. The last theory of leadership that we will be looking at is adaptive leadership. This can be seen as leaders will use their behavior to help others do the work they need to do and to adapt to the challenges that they face. Napoleon Bonaparte is quoted, "Take time to deliberate, but when the time for action comes, stop thinking and go in." Adaptive leadership can be defined by 6 different behaviors. The first behavior is get on the balcony, which can be defined as getting in the fray with your soldiers. We can see that Napoleon exemplified this by standing alongside his soldiers in battle. The second behavior is regulating distress. The battlefield is not a place of tranquility and calm. The battlefield is a place of great distress. Napoleon was seen regulating this distress and setting his soldiers upon a path towards victory. The third behavior is identifying the adaptive challenge. War is definitely not a science, but rather an art. And Napoleon had to identify the challenges he was going to face and help his army and people overcome these challenges. The fourth behavior is the challenge of maintaining disciplined attention. A military leader cannot maintain a strong campaign if his followers do not give him disciplined attention. Napoleon ensured this disciplined attention by maintaining his battle lines and standing strong upon the values he used to push his campaigns forward. The fifth behavior we can see is giving work back to the people. Napoleon did this by delegating his leadership to his different generals and also allowing his lower level soldiers rise through the ranks. The sixth principle and behavior is to protect leadership from below. Napoleon Bonaparte did not exemplify this, though, because those who were on the fringe or disagreed with him were normally exiled and were made no longer a French citizen. In conclusion, through this approach, Napoleon led an army in a nation that was forced to adapt to many different situations. He got out on the balcony and stepped into the fray of battle. He was a man that was always ready to adapt to the challenges and situations that he was facing. The scriptural comparison that I drew was that the Bible has many strong leaders. From Joshua and his cunning, strong, strategic conquests, to Absalom, a man of pride. Napoleon was similar to Absalom in the fact that he was a man of pride, which led to his downfall. Napoleon was a genius that used this to rise in the ranks, but his pride led him to his downfall at Waterloo. Proverbs 16:18. Pride goeth before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall. In conclusion, there is no debate on if Napoleon was one of the greatest leaders of all time. He led France to the brink of a world empire based solely upon his military prowess. If not for a few anomalies and small mistakes, he would have been successful. Napoleon's life was marked by compassion and passion about his cause. that would rally him to victory. Napoleon was a man that may have ended in defeat, but his legacy of leadership lives on.